later its sight back. Apollo 12 had survived the lightning strike, and Bean and his fellow astronauts went to the moon and walked on it.
There it is! There it is! Finally got straight down the middle of the road! Hang in there. 30 seconds. Coming down at 2. He's got it made. Come on in there.
Going to the moon not only looked easy now, it looked fun. But then came the next mission. Apollo 13. It was the third moon journey, and the astronauts were Jim Lovell, Fred Haise, and Jack Swigert. As their Saturn V rockets soared upwards, neither they nor Mission Control knew that a few mundane factory errors had turned the ship into a time bomb. Everything was fine until 55 hours and 62,000 miles into the flight. The astronauts were a quarter of the way to the moon. It was, incidentally, April the 13th, 1970. On the ground, everything about the flight was being watched by somebody. Cy Liebegott was watching the oxygen tanks in the service module, which supplied power and air to the spacecraft.
Odyssey Houston, standing by, over. Okay, we read you, Jack.
Liebegott decided that the oxygen in the tanks needed to be stirred, agitated, and he asked the crew to turn on the fans that would do that.
I decided that I wanted to have an extra stir before they went to sleep.
And that's when the factory error struck. Inside the tank were damaged wires. An accident was waiting to happen.
And if I hadn't done that, of course, you wouldn't be talking to me right now.
Dane, we've got one more item for you when you get a chance. We'd like it to stir up your cryo tank.
Okay.
When the crew switched on the fans, there was a spark and the tank exploded. The service module was wrecked.
Hey, we've had a problem here. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
I knew from the metallic ringing or sound in the vehicle from the explosion and the metal actually crinkling in the tunnel. I knew something bad had happened.
Roger, main B interval. And we had a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning there.
Stand by, 13. We're looking at it.
We were faced with a cascading failure. Cascading like a bunch of dominoes falling all at one time.
Okay, now let's everybody keep cool. We got limbs still attached. Let's make sure we don't blow the whole mission.
I guess I got cold all over.
The explosion had blown away the side of the service module, and vital gases poured uncontrollably into space. A routine mission had become a life or death struggle, and 3 men's lives now hung in the balance.
Okay, let's make sure that we don't do anything that's going to blow our electrical power with the batteries or that will cause us to lose the fuel cell number 2.
Calculating furiously, Mission Control discovered that the astronauts might have just enough power and air to get back home. But to save these precious resources, they would have to shut down their command module and move into the smaller lunar module. The module would now never land on the moon, but it might save their lives.
When I realized we had lost an oxygen tank, I was just sick to my stomach because we had lost the mission. We were not going to get to land.
Apollo 13 didn't have enough power to just turn around and come home. Mission Control needed the moon's gravity to slingshot the spacecraft back to Earth. So they had to go around the moon, a place they would now never set foot on. Reduced to a minimum, conditions inside the lunar module were bleak and miserable.
I've described it as being out in the woods and you don't have adequate clothing on. You don't have a jacket and you sit out there for several days, in our case 4 days. You get pretty chilled, and that just wore me down, and they, as I found out later, a staff virus that was on board got me, and I ended up with a lower urinary tract infection as a result.
We're starting to go ahead and button up the tunnel again.
In Mission Control, anxiety rose as Apollo 13 approached Earth.
Stand by, 13. We're looking at it.
They started off very diplomatically saying, gosh, Houston, these are not the exact words, but basically the context, gosh, Houston, how's that entry sequence coming? And then, a few hours later, called it, how's the entry sequence coming? At one point, I remember, they said, hey, Houston, we're looking out the window, and Earth's getting pretty big.
To start the return, the astronauts had to go back into the command module, defrost, and power it up. As Mission Control began dictating the necessary but very complicated list of instructions to the crew, an unexpected problem arose.
They started reading it up to the crew, and I think it took like 2 hours to read this to the crew. And in fact, the crew had trouble finding enough paper to write it down on. And that thought never occurred to me that we were building such a complicated sequence that was going to save this mission and save the crew, and the key resource might be enough paper to write it down on.
Now came re-entry itself, the most hazardous part of the trip. First, the crew had to jettison the crippled service module.
When they backed away from the service module, they could tell that the whole side of the service module had been blown off.
There's one whole side of that seat missing. The whole panel is blown out, almost from the base to the engine. Copy that.
Seeing the extensive damage caused by the explosion raised fresh fears. What else might fail when Apollo 13 attempted re-entry?
The big issue then was the heat shield, right? There was no way to understand what the heat shield had done. The best way to test the heat shield was to hit the atmosphere.
When we went into the blackout period on entry, it started right where it was supposed to start. And normally we could time those things, those blackout periods, within a matter of just a couple of seconds on start and a couple of seconds on when they would come out, and we could make radio contact. And you could have heard a pin drop in here. Only the Capcom kept calling. Yeah, Apollo 13, this is Houston. Nothing. I noticed in that period nobody was looking at each other. We were all kind of looking straight ahead, because we all had in our mind that we've come this far and that damn heat shield must have been damaged and they've burned up.
It's been 2 minutes now from time of drogue deployment.
2 to 3 minutes after they should have come back into contact, Capcom kept calling Apollo 13, this is Houston. Finally, Jack Swigert, hello Houston, this is Apollo 13, everything's fine here. And everybody just, oh God, it was such a relief.
An extremely loud applause here in Mission Control. This is Apollo 13 on main chutes, comes through loud and clear on the television display here.
Odyssey Houston, we show you on the main. It really looks great.
When we saw him here on the big screen on television, this place went crazy. More so than any flight probably before or after.
The extraordinary moment in an entry when you really know you effectively have it made is when you can see the main chutes. From there on, it's just waiting for impact on the ocean.
Apollo 13, this is recovery, over.